let's talk about Albo in Queensland. And Christy, let's start with you here, because let's have a look here where Albo and his big promise, I say it one more time for everyone watching, OK? When politicians, you know the great ones, and by that I don't mean this bloke, who understand that sometimes the ideas, in fact always it's the ideas, and when you as the politician think throw more politicians at the problem, you don't quite understand the Australian psyche, and you definitely don't get Queensland. Have a look.
My front bench team will continue to make multiple visits to every corner of Queensland, and there's many of them here this afternoon and at this conference with you. I also make this commitment that I'll personally visit Queensland more than once a month, more than a dozen times over every year. You'll be seeing a lot of me.
Oh, well then, Christy, that's you know, you don't walk up and say, look, Queensland is a perfect example of where we got it wrong, and I promise we will not make the same mistakes next time. Now, you can infer, if you're a political strategist, that means you'll be there more often. You can infer, if you're somebody who thinks it's the ideas, that it's the ideas, but he didn't say that. Essentially, Shorten lost because he wasn't there enough, please.
Well, I think he lost because he wasn't there enough, but when he was there, he was very tricky about what he would say. I watched that press conference at Gladstone with the Labor candidate for that seat. I can't remember his name now, but he was the gentleman who was a fully paid-up member of the CFMEU who stood next to Bill Shorten and said, I'm backing Queensland coal miners and I'm backing Adani because it brings jobs. And I watched Bill Shorten very, very cleverly move out of the shot and say nothing. And that is why Labor lost the election in Queensland. That same union now is applying pressure to the Palaszczuk government over Jackie Trad. And I think, if Labor is not careful here, they will have the full wrath of the CFMEU, because we know that they backed Liberal candidates, Michelle Landry, Keith Pitt, a number of others in far north Queensland. Again, that is why Labor lost, when the CFMEU backs Liberal candidates and goes out and campaigns for them.
Well, it's this thing too. I mean, also Campbell, and I'm sure, it's the man who's won an election in Queensland, you know better than any of us. But let's also be clear, right? For those, again, who are half listening and don't understand that Queensland is just like the rest of the country, or want to pretend that it's some sort of, backward place that, unless you have a beer with them, then you don't win them over because they're really stupid. You need to understand that the seats of Dawson, Herbert and Ford, that's North, Middle and South, all voted for same-sex marriage. Many of those places also voted for a Labor government at the state level. So they've got plenty of positions on plenty of things, just as cosmopolitan as everyone else. But the one thing that is the best and still alive in Queensland is the bullshit meter. The bullshit detector is very finely tuned in Queensland. It's probably the best in the country. WA comes close, but fair dinkum, it can spot it a mile away. And when a bloke rolls into town, has a chat with a bloke who comes up to him and says, mate, some of these people are on more than 200 grand. What are you going to do about it? Oh, we'll do something. But just everyone knows they're not going to do anything. And then that bloke gets sacked by the mates in the Labor Party, and then he doesn't stick up for him the next day. They think, do I want this bloke up the front of the ship for the next 3 years, Campbell?
No, look, absolutely right. And if I could actually give Anthony Albanese some advice, this is what he needs to do. If he really wants to win back Queensland, and I sort of said this on Twitter a few months ago, and he told me to get nicked, basically. Not a very nice way. But anyway, here's what he needs to do. Go to the Adani mine site with Terry Butler, Richard Marles, Tanya Plibersek, Mark Butler, just to name a few, probably Jackie Trad, stand up and Bill Shorten, and hold up a big banner saying, and Bill Shorten even saying, we back Adani and we back the Australian coal industry. And until they do that, I can tell you now, the LNP in Queensland will go after them every single time because they're anti-coal. Those individuals have all been vociferous, not for the last 6 months, for the last 3 or 4 years, against Adani, against coal mining. They've said the coal mining is over, that thermal coal's had its day. Their words and their actions are absolutely anti-coal. And the only way Albanese could ever turn this around is actually to go into those sort of lengths. And he hasn't got a hope. Today's effort was pathetic. Capital P, capital A, etc., underlined, highlighted. And in fact, it was a joke. And the commentary, in fact, against the write-up of his speech on the Courier Mail website said it all. It was vociferously scathing against him. People get it, as you were saying before.
Well, but also, don't forget too, I mean, this is where, Adam, The rot is so through it, right? The ideological, I say poison. That might be a little tough for some, but still, the repellent to people. Now, look, let's be honest. It was a repellent to enough people in enough places to mathematically count that the government was able to increase itself and to squeak out by one. Okay, so let's not pretend it was a 75-seat majority. But still, when you are that far behind, to be that far in front is a huge win. The deputy leader of the Labor Party, Richard Marles, said that it was a good thing if the entire coal industry just disappeared, that the markets fell apart. So the problem is, it reminds me a little bit of, say, Paul Keating before the election. This is the best set of ideas that an opposition's ever taken to an election. After the election, oh look, they lost because they were so far away from middle class values. Kevin Rudd. Thank you very much, Bill Shorten, for the life membership before the election. I'll sit there in the front row and cuddle up to Julia and say, come on, Bill, let's go. Then after the election, their strategy was all sort of over the shop. It was really infantile what they did. So here's the thing. People aren't stupid. People don't need a deep memory to remember that you said something completely different about 100 days ago.
Well, the thing that I took out of Anthony Albanese's comments, and he does have a difficult job after such a thumping loss by Bill Shorten. He does have a difficult job in coming in and taking over. But the thing I took away was that he was reading his speech as you know, I didn't think it was the best speech, but he was reading it. Now, Anthony Albanese is seen as someone with more of a common touch than Shorten and Rudd and others who've gone past in Labor. But he was reading his speech, and if I had... or my biggest piece of critique over Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd and Bill Shorten has been that the way that they've listened to their advisors and the way that they communicate or articulate their message, it's very scripted, it's very anal. I mean, going back to the times of Kevin Rudd, what I can say, what I will say, what I'd like to say, I mean, those sort of standard scripted answers. And to see Anthony Albanese reading his speech, everything he said was a lot of dribble, and he could have said much better than that if he'd spoken freely. So I thought he would come in with a different approach of not listening to those advisors, but seeing him read that nonsense I thought was quite surprising, and he would do himself a lot more justice if he spoke like a common person, the common person that I think that Tony is.